Welcome to DGUTS Theory to Practice, where we take the theoretical to conceptualization and then implementation. Thank you for listening. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Don't Give Up the Ship podcast. I've finally done it. It's theory to practice time, kids. I'm really pumped to begin this. This has been much closer to the model of what I set out to do, but I think when I first started the podcast 10 years ago now, I actually just hit the anniversary last week for a decade of doing the damn thing. I wasn't capable of what I am now. I just didn't have the knowledge, wisdom, and experience developed over time, and I'm still in the midst of an education that has helped me along the way, including with, which I'll explain here in a minute, providing the context for me to finally it snapped into place how I wanted to present a theory episode. It's like I needed a lens with which to view it through, and it took me a while to figure it out. But I happened upon something during reading for grad school, and it kind of clarified it in a really cool way. And so I finally felt ready to do it. The theory ones I feel like are going to be the most challenging for me because there's the least amount of structure to it. And while I feel like I am capable operating in that environment, it's not my comfort zone. So it was like I needed to find just a bit of structure from which to start from, which I then found the other day. So I'm excited to do this one. This series, I vacillated back and forth about where I wanted to start because I feel like Maslow's hierarchy is really important to me and kind of foundational to my belief system when it comes to a leadership development approach, particularly to education, but also in the application of, and I relied on it heavily when I was in leadership positions in the military. But this one just snapped into place, and this is kind of the other thing that I harp on the most for being foundational to being a good leader and being foundational to all leadership development topics is trust. So I'm going to start with trust, and you're going to hear me. It's going to feel like I'm interchangeably using trust and truth. I'm not exactly doing that, but they're very reliant upon one another. Like the truth being the communication of information based on trust, I suppose. It was really difficult in my mind when trying to figure out how to articulate this to kind of disentangle those. So you'll hear me do that. The focus here is trust, but you will hear me discuss truth as a theory as well, I suppose. And so perhaps I'll dual title it or something, but in relation to the goal of this first series for theory, or for theory to practice, is I'm going to kind of do both, but the focus is trust. Okay, so that's what you'll see unfold with the concepts and the practice episodes that are forthcoming. So first, I wanted to start with, I went looking for a theory of trust. I wanted to find something, even if it was philosophical and not really supported by research and evidence and stuff. Because I've talked a little bit about it before, and I won't go down a rabbit hole on it, but I don't have a lot of faith in most psychological research. If you go read the papers, a lot of them I feel are very shoddy and unreliable. Not all. I'm particular to the ones that use neuroscience techniques like fMRI and other things to get some actual objective data versus reliance on self-report things that people will lie on based on shame responses to certain topics and stuff like that, or just wanting to appear as if they're better than they actually are. Self-analysis and self-reporting, I feel like is just prone to error in data collection. So I just don't believe in it almost exclusively. I mean, it depends on what we're talking about, I guess, but I just think if it's used, it should be one component of data collection amongst a robust process where they use a lot of other measures. But anyway, so I was looking for a theory of trust. I found some interesting stuff in the philosophy realm. There's some cool YouTubers out there. I read some papers, but it was all very most of it was focused on kind of how I already felt about it. So I didn't feel like I gained much there. So then I went looking for some definitions just to try to see if I could gain a footing for how I wanted to approach this based on disagreement or inadequacy. Like, because definitions, I feel like dictionary definitions in particular, but like there's a lot of different definitions from theorists and psychologists and all kinds of people out there of trust. And it's like, it's one of those things where when you try to provide a definition, you either leave out too much or it becomes so ridiculous when you're trying to be all inclusive that it's onerous and not, it's like, it's a subjective thing. So it's, and I'll get to that. Like people are, oh, there's objective truths. Like, yeah, we'll get to that maybe, but like, that's one of the fun parts about this theory episode. So the definitions, I kind of decided on one that was okay. And I'm going to spend the first part of this picking it apart, in demonstrate why I feel like they're like trying to provide a definition of terms. The only real value in trying to define a term like trust is it gives you like just like a touch point, like a little bit of a starting point reference. But it's not, I don't feel like any of them really worked. And we'll discuss why as we get into this. But so this one starts, it's the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the actions of another party based on the exception that the other party, or expectation, sorry. The expectation that the other party will perform a particular action important to the truster, irrespective of the ability to monitor or control that other party. So basically, you're voluntarily making yourself vulnerable to what another person is going to do on the expectation that they're going to perform, like they're going to like value whatever I trust and not betray that trust. And I'm going to willingly enter into that vulnerability, but with the understanding that I can't control what this person's going to do. I'm just deciding to have faith that they're going to not violate my trust, right? Okay, so the first part I wanted to talk about, I highlighted sections of it. So the vulnerable to actions of another party part. So vulnerable to the actions. When I trust someone, I'm not necessarily vulnerable to any action. And that was one of the things that it just jumped out at me as like I can trust someone on a lower level with a piece of information, which if they shared with others, like vulnerability implies consequences, like bad consequences. Like consequences that I'm likely they're going to hurt me in some way, or maybe that I'm unwilling to accept, and it's like existential. It's like an existential crisis, like, oh my God, or existential crisis to the friendship or to the trust relationship. So I feel like, and again, it's just not providing enough detail. Like, can this be true? Sure. Is it always true? I don't think so. And it's just one point as we go along through this where it makes the definition of terms in an arena like this with a concept like trust. It doesn't do it for me. So that, and I mean, like that one's like probably the least egregious. When we get into performing a particular action important to the truster, particularly I highlighted the word action. It doesn't always need to be an action. You could make the argument, like I had a discussion recently about an ethics concept of withholding information, removing somebody's agency. So like if I have a responsibility to provide you with certain information and I don't, you are ignorant of that, and so you're ignorant of any consequences to making yourself vulnerable in that situation. So if I do that, like you could make an argument that the withholding itself is an action. I suppose it's like more of a semantics debate, but it's another to me it's not an action. I'm not taking any action. I'm just withholding information, but that can be a violation of trust. Like if you trust me to provide you with all the information that you're required to do the thing correctly, or that you're just there's an understanding in our trust relationship that I'm supposed to provide you with this information and I withhold it. That's a violation of trust. But I would also say that like the withholding of isn't exactly an action at all. Again, it's kind of semantic, but like it was part of it that I was just like, I don't love the way that's articulated. And then important to the truster is the fun one. And this is the one where we're going to get into the relativity of trust. So the action that's important to the truster, right? So if I'm choosing to trust someone with something, with anything, maybe it's my feelings, maybe it's with secrets, maybe it's with, caring for something that's important to me, whatever. The importance to the truster being me, I'm choosing to trust you, it's relative, right? It can change and is often, even if we come from the same like social and cultural contexts, our understanding of the trust relationship being I'm trusting you to do this action according to this definition, that's important to the truster. It's like you and I have to have the exact same understanding of what that is, why it's important to me, like what the action is, why it's important to me, and what violation would look like, right? But if we have different understandings, even if we're from the same social and cultural and what religious contexts even, the different understanding makes the understanding of what that truth is relative. Like, and what the actions and expectations I have of you in this relationship is relative. All of it. It's just like communication, like the sender, receiver, medium, obstacles, all that kind of stuff. If you have a slightly different understanding of what this means, it opens you up to violate that trust. And so it's a thing where each party, like the more people that you trust with this information, the more different interpretations of what that trust relationship means, how violating it appears or presents, like what my understanding is of what I expect to be done can be wildly different by the person on the other end of it. Think like the telephone game, like how the more people you tell, the message inevitably warps. So trust relativity is a wild thing. And then when you get outside of, and we'll get into that more, when you get outside of having the same social cultural context as the person that you're entering into this trust relationship with, then it can get absolutely wild. And we'll get to that. But then the last thing I wanted to talk about with the definitional piece was irrespective of the ability to monitor or control the other party. So the key here is I would be accepting that I cannot monitor or control that party. I don't, like, to start, I don't believe that's true really at all. Like there is some semblance of monitoring, because if the trust is violated, I'm going to find out. And if I trust someone, I don't know that there's any human relationship where someone trusts another person 100% outside of, like, I could say like my mom for sure. Like I just trust implicitly my dad, my brother, but like my wife probably, but like even that one, like, I mean, I trust my wife implicitly. I'm just saying, like, I need to clarify that in case she listens to this, but I'm just saying, like, there are relationships where people will probably say that and not actually mean it, because divorce happens, because people's feelings change, and then they just decide to exit that romantic relationship. So there's certain, like, people who squirrel money away and don't tell their wife about it, or don't tell their husband about it, or don't tell their significant other about it. That's not 100% trust, right? So to say I can't monitor or control, like, that's if you're squirreling money away in that instance, you're trying to exercise a modicum of control over the consequences of that relationship's trust or structure or whatever being violated, of it ending. So you don't have 100% trust in the actions of that person, because you're trying to, like, cushion the fall that would happen. And that could be demonstrated in a lot of other ways in relationships where you are trying to monitor or control a bit. So, like, it's not completely irrespective of any ability or attempt to do those things, because like you see people doing it all the time. Like you trying to, like, gossip is a great example of that. Like when you hear people, you know, spilling the tea, it's like it's usually a violation of someone else's trust, but also you are involved in monitoring that or engaging in that conversation to receive that information just in case somebody is gossiping about you or gossiping about somebody you care about. You're trying to monitor and control. So saying that trust is irrespective of the ability to monitor and control the actions of the other party, to me seems ridiculous, because that would imply that any trust relationship is a 100% implicit trust relationship. And I don't think that's almost never true in my opinion. So that's an example there, like that, the reason why the definitions in these areas that I plan to focus on are pretty unreliable. I mean, it can provide it, like if for some reason you were talking to someone that had no idea what trust was, the value of a definition could go up, but most people at least have a rudimentary understanding of trust. So most of these definitions that I found were pretty not great, and just don't provide a lot of value because they are so limited, and no matter how you try to articulate it, it's almost always incomplete or partially incorrect or what have you. So the thing I wanted to talk about with how I decided, like kind of how I arrived at the way I wanted to articulate this theory, was I read a paper on social constructivism the other day, which the whole holistic understanding of it is kind of irrelevant to this conversation. I will put the paper in the show notes if you want to nerd out. It's, in my opinion, is really terrible and almost entirely incorrect. And I'll get to the parts of it, like some of the parts of it that I thought were so incorrect, but it did demonstrate my points in a really great way. It's kind of like the counter argument in a way. But basically, social constructivism implies what is real is not objective fact. Rather, what is real evolves through interpersonal interaction and agreement to what is fact. And the way that he explains this in the paper is essentially that he's focused on decision making, and he's explaining like an ethical decision making model. And the way that he's focused on it is he explains that this is ridiculous point one, is that decision making is made entirely due to biological system, like based on the operation and inputs of biological systems and like social or cultural context type systems, like a social agreement on what is indeed fact, which is what it meant by the interpersonal interaction and agreement, right? And basically is trying to debunk psychology entirely, like human psychology entirely, by saying, no, it's all biological. Like, think like Freudian almost, where like, you just have these impulses and urges that you can't help but act on. So it becomes based on this, because then he goes on to discuss how decision making is not internal to the person. Like the understanding of making a decision is not internal to a human being, and that's not how it happens. It always happens based on some type of like understanding that is arrived at between a group of people, basically one or more, or two or more people, and the society and culture holistically. I think that take is extremely ridiculous and brain dead, and it's a denial of free will. Like at its core, when you read the paper, and he may believe this, I was unable to find anything that said outright that the author of this paper does not believe human beings have free will. But even if that's untrue, like the whole system of social constructivism is a denial of free will. But taking it a bit further, even if it is a denial of free will, the decision making would still happen internally, even if it was just like a mathematical system. Like think like AI, right? We to this point largely agree that it's not conscious. It's not capable of like human cognition. So if I input a bunch of data in a chat GPT, it uses like algorithmic calculations or whatever to formulas. Like it's a formulaic solution to my problem. It's drawing on available information to input like into a formula based on my question to then generate an answer for me. So if you think about human beings, right? Sensory inputs being like sight, sound, touch, all those things, taste, that would be like the biological systems he's referring to. And just like the human urges and whatever, which I would argue is human psychology, he does not, which I find nonsensical and ridiculous, but okay, moving on. If all the inputs are what they are, so we have like a problem set, and all those inputs are input into this biological system, and then they utilize that data, the sensory inputs, and the social cultural rule set, which would be the algorithm, and then craps out an answer. It's like, unless you're arguing that everybody's biological system is exactly the same and their interpretation of all of the social and cultural contexts are exactly the same, then the human being is still making the decision internally, no matter what. Even if you agree, which I don't, but even if you agree that the human being is essentially just this like biological systemic calculator, the inputs still go in, and then internally, based on the rules of the culture and the biological system inputs, you're still arriving at an answer that is computed internally. But then when you re-input free will into this equation, it kind of blows everything up, because unless you are denying the concept of free will, it's like I get to decide whatever I want based on all of the inputs that come in, right? So the social, cultural, context inputs, my interpretation of those based on my human psychology and just human cognition, and the biological systems plays a role, right? But I exercise free will in what urges I act on and what decisions I make based on the inputs that I have and the information that's presented to me. So, and I can agree to an extent, right, that trust, like, so let me get to the end of this actually, because then I'm talking a lot about constructivism, social constructivism, but I need to like then apply it to trust as a theory, right? So free will, right? I'm making the decisions. I'm deciding on what's important. I'm interpreting all these inputs in the social and cultural context, right? So then when we get to trust relationships, the same would then be true, that based on social, cultural, religious context, based on my own like upbringing and experiential knowledge gained over a lifetime of trial and error, my learning through reading and consuming of information, teachings by my parents and other important figures in my life, etc. As all of those things are playing a role, right? So when we arrive at deciding when I'm going to trust, how I'm going to trust, to what length I'm going to trust, etc., and even like the reactions to the consequences of the violation of the trust, all of those things feed into it, right? But also because based on that's the foundation of trust for an individual. When you start to incorporate other people, which can, like, you have to establish a trust relationship, that's where the relativity happens. It's inevitable. You can't avoid it, because we all are very different. No, even within the same social cultural context, but especially outside of it, which within the skin of the military, you have wildly varying social, cultural, religious contexts. Like everybody comes from all these different places and all these different upbringings and different cultural values, different moral values, right? So if we're all starting with a different understanding, a different rule set, different parameters, you're going to get wildly different interpretations of what trust looks like, how you trust other individuals, what the violation of trust looks like, how it affects me, etc. Like, and even what it even means, like what a betrayal of trust even means. Different people could decide that different thresholds for what constitutes a violation. So you can see the beginnings of wildly different interpretations of trust, and then it applies to truth the same way, which I find I find interesting that people don't believe this or don't understand this, I suppose, because when you look at just the dialogue in our society on many different issues, a lot of which like you'll see it within like the political realm right now, there's a lot of crazy things going on. But when an issue comes up, right? Let's say like it's like religion is a good example, and it's one used in the paper. It was one of the probably the only valuable point, besides it provided me with this platform with which to process this. The one valuable point made in the paper was the author references religion as truth, right? And how truth can be and is relative, where people decide within the realm of religion which truth they want to subscribe to. And oftentimes when they do, their truth is the one and only truth, right? And once they decide that and they've just fully committed to this ideological truth that they believe to be the one and only truth, this God is the one and only God, or gods, or whatever the specifics of that religion is, then you can justify a lot based on what you believe to be the truth, right? That we fought wars from time immemorial over my God is the only God and you heathens are going to believe, and I'm going to bring it to you with fire and brimstone, right? The Crusades being a great example. And you could, even up to modernity, where all the terror wars were based on a religious understanding on the Muslim side of it, primarily, like, because the United States is so diverse that you couldn't really point at one religion exactly being the onus for us. But on their side of it, they like a big part of why the terror attacks on 9/11 happened was because it was an objection to us being over there, but also we're infidels because we're not Muslims and we don't subscribe to that religion, right? So when you look at it through that lens, like that in and of itself is an example of the relativity of truth. Like, religious zealots believe that these things are objectively true and that you cannot deny them. To deny them is heresy. So I can then justify all these horrible actions based on it. But then you say, like, horrible actions. So waging war based on your religion, is it like, are the actual acts of violence horrible if they're justified by the religion, like the principles of the religion or the laws of the religion or whatever, right? Because, like, you could look at the, like, 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill, stuff like that, right? But plenty of Christians have killed plenty of people based on what their interpretation of this religion's rules or their God's will or whatever that they believe that is. They've justified horrific acts. Like, there's all the Spanish Inquisition is probably a good example. I don't know that much about it, but I'm pretty sure that was religiously motivated. But, like, the point being, these people are able to rationalize what I'll say I believe, and probably most people listening to this believe are just morally objectionable, or just horrific acts, just objectively terrible and morally wrong. And probably you could argue there's a lot of moral absolutes involved that are being violated, like harming innocent people, killing innocent people that just believe something different than you. Because the dynamic is, on the other side of that, there are very likely people that have a different truth than yours that they also believe to be the one and only truth, and are also willing to engage in a defense of that from, just an argument to violence, right? And so a trust relationship, what I'm trying to illustrate here is the relativity of truth is foundational to understanding trust, and how every person's understanding of trust is relative, right? It's different. And think about it, wild examples. Like I talked about it on a podcast, I forget which one, but where there are things that are considered horrific and terrible in the United States that if you go overseas are completely normal. I've heard a lot of discussion around free speech lately. I pay attention to some political things. If I have a political affiliation in any way or like a leaning, it would probably be libertarian bordering on anarchist. I'm very much like a just leave me alone and let me live my life kind of guy, but it's neither here nor there. I don't really have a lot of like hard and fast political beliefs, but they were talking within the context of free speech. What they were talking about was how it's a radical concept outside of the United States, which seems insane. Like, because you're in it, it's like when you go overseas and someone tells you you have an American accent. And you're like, I don't have an accent. You have an accent, right? But of course you do, because you're not in America anymore. And free speech, the concept enshrined in the Constitution of our country, is a radical concept elsewhere, and you see a lot of it manifesting in other countries right now. Like in England, there's a lot of crackdown on what we would consider free speech. There are people that are getting arrested for things they share on social media, like just that the government has decided is harmful. In Germany, there's a crackdown on a lot of crazy stuff right now. Things we would believe to be crazy, but they clearly don't, because their government, and to an extent, I would imagine their citizens, because those governments were elected by them, believe those things to be justified, believe that you should go to prison for a social media post that is against whatever they believe to be acceptable speech, right? And to us, that's just like, I mean, that's a hard red line. You'd see people in the streets if you came after free speech in that kind of a way, right? And to an extent, you did in certain times in our country. So you have to understand that everybody views things differently. And even though it's hard to envision or accept, because a lot of people aren't exposed to it, but you like try to take the time to examine your relationships with people, try to examine or just discuss it with people that are willing. What do you believe trust is? What do you believe truth is? And you can use specific examples to try to gauge it, but an understanding of a trust relationship the theory being it's going to be wildly different for each person, and that's going to need to play a role in your navigation of trust, right? Like, you're going to need to understand not just the basics, which I'll get into in concepts and practice, the more of the nuts and bolts of trust relationships, how to, establish trust, how to maintain it, how to repair it when it's damaged, what violations look like, the consequences, all those things. We'll get into all that, but the importance of understanding trust as a theory is that it's not an absolute thing. Like, there isn't one, and that's where the truth, trust, interchangeability will come in here, is there's not objective truth, really. Like, have you ever seen the memes or I guess it's not a meme, just like a social media post of the blue dress that's not blue, and no one can agree on what color it is, because human beings perceive color in different ways. Some people are colorblind. Some people just have like different interpretations. Like, your sensory systems work differently. Like, my hearing works differently. I have an auditory processing disorder where like, if you get me in a crowded room and everybody's trying to talk at the same time, it's Charlie Brown's teacher. I cannot focus. I can't hear or remember what you're saying. And I also have like I forget what they call it, but it's kind of like the first thing I just explained was dichotic listening issue. But then the second thing, it's like a short-term memory for auditory sensory inputs in particular. Like, I have a hard time, like, you'll say a sentence to me, and if I don't respond immediately, I might forget part of what you said, and I'll have to have you repeat yourself. And my wife thought I was going deaf for the longest time, but like, because I'd have to make her repeat herself all the time. But it's like, it's not that I didn't hear the sound. It's that I didn't remember all of what she said, so I couldn't respond to it. I needed her to repeat it. And so everybody interprets the world differently. from sensory inputs to how they process information and how they reason, right? That's the human psychology that Homeboy is trying to deny, that I think is absolutely absurd, right? It is, human cognition happens differently, right? And you can, I can give ground on the we are going to agree on some things being true, right? Like, I'm talking to you right now, right? Well, you know, you could argue because it's a recording and all that, but like, if you were sitting in front of me right now and I was talking to you, you and I would have to agree, right, that I'm talking to you. But there's probably somebody out there that would deny it because beliefs, because of their understanding of the world, because whatever. I mean, there are things that people deny all the time, that like the flat earthers, they like, just come on, man. Like, there's so much evidence. Like, it's round. It is. But like, there are people that, because of the information they bring in, because of their education and upbringing and social and cultural context, they arrive at a conclusion like the earth is flat. Like, okay, to them, that's true. So you can't really argue with the relativity of truth. And that's a hard thing for most people to swallow. It's like, I harp on this point a lot, but like, people have a hard time. It frustrates me that like people have a hard time holding two diametrically opposed thoughts in their mind at the same time. Like, being able to kind of play devil's advocate for yourself and examine all sides of the issue and try to be fair about it. Like, well, I think this, but I can understand how you believe that, right? And if you go down the rabbit hole on something as patently absurd as flat Earth, I can understand how someone would arrive at that belief system, right? I don't think it's true, but I think it's based on how I process information, my education, my belief system, my cultural and social context, right? So truth is relative. As hard as that pill is to swallow, it is. And it's not because I believe it is, like, the things I believe to be true, I don't believe most of those things to be relative. Like, I don't believe that, like, well, I believe them to be relative because people believe things differently, like believe different things than me and interpret the world differently than me. But like, I don't believe that those things are not true just because other people believe they aren't true, if that makes sense. Like, just because there is relativity doesn't mean that I'm shaky in the things that I've resolved are true. But I can't walk through the world believing that just because I believe it's true, everybody needs to believe it's true, right? And that's where you run into the issues with people trying to force ideological belief systems down your throat, right? And we could like use the religious example still, but I'll choose to use like the Chiefs mess example, right? Like, there's a lot of beliefs, like ideological belief systems built into the culture of the Chiefs mess in the Navy, right? And they are shoved in your face and down your throat on a regular basis. And there's not a lot of room for discussion or challenge or just discourse on whether or not I believe these things to be true, whether or not this is the best way of doing things, etc. Which is why, you know, like when I do discuss it, it gets a lot of pushback, because it's, what they're doing is like, what we're discussing is not just a debate of information and do we believe this is the best way of doing things? It's not problem solving. It's ideological belief systems being defended by zealots. So it's an emotional response. Like, a debate of that kind on what is true is an emotional response. And you'll get that a lot from people when you challenge what they believe to be true. If you challenge someone's truth, you're going to get an emotional response most of the time. It takes a long time to arrive at a place where you've developed an ability, which I think I mostly have, but I'm sure there's buttons you could push that would get an emotional response, right? It takes a long time to arrive at a place where you can regulate that emotional response with the understanding that this truth, this thing I believe to be true, is relative to everyone else. Like, they're going to interpret the world differently. They're going to arrive at different conclusions than me. And it's okay to entertain those things. And here's the rub. because what if you're wrong? Right? We discussed this a little bit in, I don't know if it was loyalty or one of the concepts episodes, but like, I've believed things to be true and then been talked off of those beliefs, right? I've been convinced on certain issues that I'm wrong. And even within a conversation where like even in class today, I kind of snapped to a judgment based on what someone said. And then the next sentence that came out of their mouth, I was like, oh, that's a good point. You know, like where it was like I jumped to, I use what psychology calls a heuristic, and it's like a mental shortcut where I just process information quickly and jump to a conclusion, which is a very useful system sometimes. When I need to make a decision rapidly, we're talking about like avoiding danger or when there's some kind of a valid sense of urgency. But in a discourse about whatever topic we're talking about where you're arriving at a conclusion you believe to be true, there's almost never a huge sense of urgency. I mean, there are certainly situations where there are, but there's almost never a sense of urgency to arrive at that decision. So you can be deliberate. You can take the time to imbibe all the information and then reason your way to what you believe to be a correct decision, what you believe to be truth. However, you can be presented with new information and then be like, damn, I was wrong about that. Another example of truth being relative, right? And that was one of the biggest points about truth and trust that I want to drive home, is that truth being relative, trust is going to be relative as well. What do I mean by that? When you enter into trust relationships, not only is our understanding of truth going to be relative, which we've kind of already discussed, like everybody's going to have a different understanding of what trust means and all the different rules that apply, but also trust, the application of trust is going to be relative. The levels and commitment of the trust relationship is going to be relative. Like there's going to be levels to it, and I can apply it situationally, right? And so a good example of it is my best friend in this world. I consider him a brother from another mother, trust him with my life. He's somebody I would say the 100% trust thing. Like I'd trust him with anything, right? We both are poker players, right? I'm a little more removed from it. He's still very, very much in it. Lives near Vegas, is a semi-professional poker player. Like he's an elite poker player. If I sat down at a poker table with him, I'm not going to trust anything he says or does ever. Like, because it's poker. And if you understand how those things, how that game works, right? It, like, a lot of the game is skill based. Some of it obviously is luck based because that's how cards works. But there's a lot of skill involved, and a lot of that skill is rooted in deception, because that's how you separate people from their chips or their money, right? When you're playing for chips or money, right? When you're playing competitively. So in that context, I would not trust him. Like I know he's trying to deceive me, because of course he is, because he's an elite poker player. So there's going to be situations where you're not going to fully trust someone, and it's completely appropriate, right? Another example would be like if you were teaching a teen how to drive, like if you were the adult in the car while a permit driver that's 16 or 15 or whatever, who has very little experience operating an automobile, and where error has really, really steep consequences, then yeah, I'm not going to fully trust that person. I'm going to be monitoring and attempting to control the crap out of them while they're operating that motor vehicle, because in effect, they have my life in their hands depending on where we are and what we're doing and how they're operating the motor vehicle, right? So the application of a trust relationship, like how you're going to apply trust in that relationship, can be dynamic. Like it's going to depend on the context of the relationship you're entering into, like why you're entering into it, how you're entering into it, what you hope to gain or at least not lose when entering into that relationship. It's going to shift. It's going to depend. And you can apply trust situationally, right? There's going to be, like, if I'm on over-instruct for a watchstander, like, do I implicitly trust that watchstander? No, because they're not qualified, and it's my job to observe them and intercede if necessary, right? So you're going to need to understand that you're going to need to modulate the level of trust depending on the context of the trust relationship you're entering into. So again, the relativity of trust is ever present. And it's something that when you enter into relationships, you need to understand that that's true, and it's appropriate. And it makes complete sense when you analyze all the information and then arrive at a decision on how you want to enter into that trust relationship and what, in what way you want to apply the concept of truth, right? And so or trust rather, sorry. See, there I go, interchanging things again. I think trust as a concept, or as a theory in this case, I keep interchangeably using those terms, and I shouldn't because of how I decided to name the episodes of the series. I don't want to confuse anybody on which one we're doing here. But theoretically, trust is really interesting to me because of how dynamic it is, how it is relative based on each human being's varying understanding of the world and varying understanding of what truth is and what trust is and how it works. And I think it's really important to take some time to examine that, take some time to really think on, how do I understand trust? What do I expect from another person that I'm trusting? What do I expect from another person that's trusting me? How do I intend to act on that trust that's given to me? Or how do I intend to act when I decide to trust someone with, whatever I'm trusting them with? What are the violations going to look like? How am I going to react to those things? How important is this to me? And also really reflect on how much time you spend evaluating how other people interpret and understand those concepts, right? Take some time to discuss trust with someone, and just I think you'll be a little surprised at people's interpretations of it sometimes. I think there will be a lot of alignment if you're in the same social and cultural context, but there will almost certainly be variance of some kind. And I think it's a really interesting topic to spend some time just self-reflecting on, and maybe do a little research too. I found it pretty fun to listen to some lectures on theories of truth within philosophy, because there's a lot of different ones, and they get into some really strange ideas that some of them I thought were nonsensical, or just I didn't understand the point of even spending time there, but some of them were pretty interesting and enlightening. Just not because I agree with them so much as it enlightens you to how other people process trust, how other people think about the trust theoretically and philosophically and conceptually, and how they make decisions. Or how just even the human potential to make decisions. There's so many different dynamics to how somebody can understand trust, and then based on how they understand it, how the decision tree can then, grow out from there. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I think I hit on everything I wanted to, but being this is the first one, and being that, I'm always learning, I'm really open to critique, interpretation. I really want these to be valuable to the listener. So please, please, please hit me up with feedback at dgutspodcast@gmail.com. I would really appreciate any constructive criticism, anything you would like to hear discussed more. Maybe I can sneak it into the concepts one. But I really hope this adds value. I hope that as I proceed with the concepts and the practice episodes, that the whole, so once I get the holistic, the whole series done for trust, that it adds a lot of value, answers a lot of questions, and that it can be a resource for everyone. So please don't be shy about feedback. I'm very, this is uncharted territory for me in a way. So I would really love to hear from you. And I hope I do, and I hope this was valuable, and I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you want to support us, you can go to don'tgiveupshitpodcast@gmail.com. There's a donate button in the upper right-hand corner of the website. Or you can go to patreon.com/dgutspodcast, pick one of the 5 tiers, and become a member. Probably the best way is to like, share, subscribe, review on all the platforms for all the things. It's free. I know economically it's rough out there. Things are getting weird. So, like I've had some patrons unsubscribe, more likely because I've been more inactive lately, but also like I understand budgets are getting tight. Things are getting weird. People are kind of getting into conservation mode. I totally understand. And at this point, like I'm going to treat this like a side hustle, but it's like, I'm not focused on the economic impact of any, the economics of the business at this point. So I completely understand if you can't support financially. If anybody's looking for it, which, I doubt you are, because it was pretty unsuccessful generally, but like the website for apparel is down, kind of reshuffling some things. And so there will be a shop function added back to dgutspodcast.com at some point. It'll probably be a little more limited, based on what's offered, but like there'll be some things there, as soon as I get the time to kind of go in there and reorganize the Squarespace functionality and stuff. But yeah, that's it. I really hope you enjoyed it. I had so much fun doing this. And that's it. That's what I got for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and don't give up the ship. Please hit the like button, drop a comment down below on what you thought, and subscribe to the channel.